community college at night to supplement my meager income, you know. But anyway, I had a great fun doing that, and it was just recently published. I wrote the book Widder's Landing, and it concludes with the Battle of New Orleans. And I had to do a lot of extensive research. A lot of these very, very high-powered speakers that you all have heard during the symposium, you know, in one way or the other, contributed a lot of their research into a fiction novel that you try to make as realistic as possible. But I come from the great state of Kentucky. I'm sort of an unofficial ambassador. I have been all over the United States, from Missouri to West Virginia, from Michigan to Florida, and I'm here to tell you that our state slogan is not 3.5 million happy people and 15 last names. That is erroneous. Nor is our most popular greeting card, Happy Birthday, Uncle Dad. That is wrong. Wrong. We have great things in Kentucky. We have tobacco. We have whiskey. We have hemp. We have fast horses and corn-fed girls. And all of those things will get you into serious trouble. Kentucky has had a lot of bad raps, you know, in the press. But it got a good rap with this song. Some of you, how many of y'all sang back there? Okay, and there's some of you that came in here. I hope you got the song sheet. But it tells the story of the Kentuckians in the Battle of New Orleans. And it was written a little after that time. It was put to a different tune. And the Kentuckians said, that's the story. That's what happened at New Orleans. And it really did. That's pretty true, with a lot of omissions. Like any good story, you know, it's good with omissions. And so let's just go on and do one verse, and we're going to skip. We did 1, 2, and 3 back there, but let's do 1, and then we're going to do a couple more as we tell the story of Kentucky in the Battle of New Orleans. Again, this was played by my high school students. It's called, they were called the Chinks and Chickens Band, and they were pretty good. And join in if you already know the verse. Go ahead, I'll play it once, and we'll sing the first verse. I'll just do the chorus. It's pretty easy. You know, it's kind of like 99 bottles of beer on the wall. You'll get it. Okay, pretty easy. Here's the chorus. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. Ye gentlemen and ladies fair who grace this famous city, just listen if you've time to spare while I rehearse a ditty. And for the opportunity, conceive yourself quite lucky, for 'tis not often that you see a hunter from Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. And we'll stop it right there, okay? So we did well. Again, St. Dominic's Middle School are going to be named honorary Kentuckians for singing it at their celebration in New Orleans. There's some really interesting facts about Kentucky that I try to make sure that every high school, middle school, elementary school, and all the way up to 102 and beyond knows that Kentucky has 120 counties. 31 of them are named for people who fought in the War of 1812. 9 of them were killed in the battle, and 8 of them died at the River Raisin. That is really something else as well. But here's the big figure. 64% of all Americans that were killed in the war were Kentuckians. There were 17 other states in the Union, and Kentucky lost almost twice as many as all of the other states combined. Not one battle was fought in Kentucky. We went everywhere else to fight. So that really tells you a story. And we were up in the north in Canada, We didn't defend any forts. To show you how enthusiastic Kentuckians were, Charles Scott, our fourth governor, called for 2,500 troops. Over 8,000 joined in, signed up. And it was just unbelievable. Emotions were high. On to Canada was their cry. At that time, Kentucky was a very prominent state. We had the Speaker of the House then. In 1811, that was Henry Clay. We have the President of the Senate right now, Mitch McConnell. So we're a little more, influential than people would like to think. Henry Clay said that, hey, the Kentuckians can go up to Canada and whip them all by themselves. They're a militia they can go up there single-handedly. It'll be a mere frontiersman's frolic. He said, I believe they can give it all to Congress right now. He said that on the Congress floor. Now, this was our first governor, and he was reelected in 1812. His name was Isaac Shelby, and we have a Shelby County, Kentucky. They called him Old Daddy. Old Kings Mountain, because he had fought in the American Revolution. And they called him affectionately Old Daddy because he was 62 years old. I'll be that in 2 years. But that was pretty old for back then. And he comes to office and he says, I want to call up 2,500 men for another run into Canada and get me a good horse. Well, Governor, why do you want a horse? Because I'm going with my men. But you can't. You're the governor. Said, get me a horse. And they did. And he went north to Newport with 2,500 men. Although there were twice that many that signed up. And there, while we were in Newport, we met our mascot for the war. Do you know what that is? Some people thought it was, they say, was it a wildcat? Because Kentucky basketball. No. Was it a horse? No. It was a pig. There were two pigs that were fighting in the streets of Newport, and the victorious pig, when it won, everybody was whooping and hollering and cheering, and that pig started following the troops around. They were like, what is this pig doing here? Get out of here. It tried to get on the boats with them when they were going across to the state of Ohio. And finally, the last boat took off, and that pig was squealing, and it was being left behind, and it swam the Ohio River. It was exhausted. Now, it wasn't as big as it is today. I don't think it could have done it, but it did swim the Ohio River, collapsed in the mud. The troops went on, and that pig came into camp at night. And I think it must have been a suicide pig, because armies like bacon for breakfast. But that pig followed them all the way up into Canada, and even it was given some rides when it got tuckered out. You can imagine, what the troops with blistered feet said. Good soldiers have to walk, and pigs get to ride. What's the world coming to? But that pig followed Shelby all the way up through the Battle of the Thames, the Great Lakes, came home and was retired on Shelby's farm, never to become a country hymn. Kentuckians did play a vital role, though, in the war. Again, a lot of people don't know that they played a role in the Navy. Oliver Hazard Perry had built a green timbered fleet at Presque Isle, Pennsylvania, put them on the lakes to challenge the British ships. And the Kentuckians, he got out there, he had the ships, they were knocked together with green pegs and planks, and they hauled the cannons over the Adirondacks, and he had rope and sail, he had everything but men. And the Kentuckians said, well, we'll help. You all are inland people, you're country yokels. We can pull a rope, we can move a cannon, and I bet you we can go up in the top of the rigging, and we can shoot better than your men. So that's exactly what they did. They got up in the rigging and served as marksmen and Marines. And so that was really something. The Kentuckians fought valiantly all over the northwest and into Canada. We lost some severe casualties at the River Raisin. This was a terrible massacre where 60 to 90 Kentuckians were burned alive in their cabins. These were the wounded. The others that were 360 killed on the field, 60 to 90 burned alive. And then, it made people so angry that the battle cry of the war, just like remember the Alamo or World War II is remember Pearl Harbor, it was remember the Raisin. And that's the battle cry. It was even shouted down here at New Orleans. We like to talk about this in Kentucky. We have the flag, the American flag, 15 stars, 15 stripes. That's the same one that flew over Fort McHenry. It flew down here. We were the 15th state. They had not yet started adding stars. They said, we're getting pretty stripy here. You know, what are we going to do? So this flag was still the one in existence, and we call it the Kentucky flag. And that is when Francis Scott Key, that's the one that he saw flying over Fort McHenry. Again, we had heavy losses at Fort Meigs. That was our worst set of casualties. That's in Ohio. There is a group of militiamen that I run around with, and they let me their gun for that photograph. But that was at the Bicentennial back in 2013. Kentuckians they distinguished themselves at the Battle of the Thames River. They literally were mounted on horseback and charged right in the middle of the British lines. And people said, God, those Kentuckians are crazy. Look at them. They were whooping and yelling and shooting and slashing, and they broke the back of the British Army here at Moraviantown, or the Battle of the Thames. Tecumseh was killed they claimed by the future Vice President of the United States, Richard Mentor Johnson. And their commander of the Northwest Territory, William Henry Harrison, said it rarely occurs that a general has to complain of the excessive ardor of his men. Yet such appears always the case whenever the Kentucky militia are engaged. It is indeed the source of all misfortunes. And he said, they seem to think that valor alone can just win anything. And they must have been thinking that when they came here to New Orleans. Moving on, the war, we kind of traded with Great Britain. They were busy over in Europe with Napoleon. But Napoleon had a disastrous Moscow campaign. He was defeated at the Battle of the Nations at Leipzig. And they put him away on the island of Elba. And now they're going to end the dirty, shirted embarrassment that America has caused them for 2 years. So they are free to send 3 gigantic fleets. You see the purple arrow at the top. They're going to come down and sever the New England states. They're going to come down through the Lake River routes, but they're going to be turned back at the Battle of Chesapeake Bay. A young commander by the name of BoNOHS is going to be able to use his little bitty ships, but turn them around with winches and cables and present fresh broadsides, and the British they're destroyed. We didn't have it so good at the middle arrow right there. That is when they came in to Chesapeake Bay. They broke the back of the army at Bladensburg, and they steamrolled into the capital, putting Dolly Madison, and she got just in time to get the portrait of George Washington, a big 6-foot thing rolled up, and they got personal papers and things, and they got out, even leaving their supper on the tables. That's how close the British were. They burned the executive mansion. And of course, it would be rebuilt and called the White House later. But amazing to think that we lost our capital at that time. Then the bottom arrow, which concerns us down here, a southern invasion fleet, 14,000 men, 60 warships, some of them ships of the line. And they were putting in command General Sir Edward Hackenham, brother-in-law of the Duke of Wellington, who will defeat Napoleon, the hero of Salamanca. And they bring him down here in front of, with 14,000 men, 60 warships to march on New Orleans. That was a very obvious objective. New Orleans was the 5th largest city at the time. It was beautiful and very profitable. And of course, when we talk about Kentuckians and Tennesseans at the Battle of New Orleans, here's your premier Tennessean right here, General Jackson. He arrives in New Orleans, and he thought, oh my gosh, I've come to Sin City. But he did see, a beautiful European-style city with the St. Louis Cathedral, the Cabildo, and the Presbytere. He was amazed at that. It was a very profitable city, especially before the war. You have the big national ocean-going vessels, and then, of course, your barges of the day, the flatboats, would come into the levee as well. They said that on a busy day before the war, you could hop across 1.25 miles of those flatboat routes. But it wasn't that way because of the British blockade then. Cotton had, there had been a new invention by Eli Whitney. What was that machine? Cotton gin. And that was going to make cotton more profitable. And the French settlers, of course, Etienne Bohr gets the credit for learning how to crystallize sugar, refined sugar, and that was going to be a very profitable affair. Kentuckians, of course, deposited their very important products, none of them good for you. Tobacco, of course, they packed it in great big hogsheads and put it on flatboats and sent it down the Mississippi. Hemp, which was used then it was used for rope, not dope, and cordage and cotton baling. They like the cotton planters like to use it for sacking. And then, of course, the very good Kentucky bourbon whiskey that had taken Europe by storm. So those were our products, and we wanted that right to deposit. We wanted that place free, and we had a stake in it. That's why Kentuckians and Tennesseans, and it should have been all the people west of the Appalachians, needed the port of New Orleans. Jackson, the army was given, basically they gave Jackson 990 boycotts. You'll see figures that vary, just like the pronunciations here. I haven't heard one pronounced right, or not right, but the same. But Jackson arrives with just not even 1,000 men to defend against 14,000 of the number one superpower of the world. He arrives at 106 East Royal Street, and you can most find him at the Sparrow's Coffee House and Exchange. It was a little more congenial, where the officers could get a hot buttered rum on a cold New Orleans night. We were in the grip of a mini ice age at that time. Jackson looked at the maps and said, what am I supposed to do with 990 men? All the way from Pensacola, way over there, to New Orleans. How can I do it? And look at these maps. Not one of them is the same. He said, even the pirates know more than the local citizens. Well, they would, because they were using the canals and bayous to smuggle goods in. And they said, yeah, you've got some dilemmas, and one of them is Jean Lafitte. We just bombed his base a few weeks ago, and we sacked his base at Barataria. And said, what are we going to do? So if the British offered him money, well, they did. They offered him a chest of money, a pardon. We were very fortunate that Lafitte did not go with him. He said, I wouldn't deal with Lafitte. He later does. They have a come to Jesus meeting. And they have flints. So we were really low on flints, and we were able to do that. And of course, there was some brokering going on with Edward Livingston and some of the top citizenry who were enriched by the pirates during the blockades and during the American customs. Some of them were rich from that. But the British were also trying to foment unrest among the disaffected groups, and particularly the slaves, but also Indians, Creoles, Spaniards, anybody they thought that might come in on their side. And I've heard his name pronounced 5 different ways. Cloche is the one I've heard mostly. Cloche was here, and Jackson did have local citizenry. And again, De La Ronde, and there's a whole list of people that had, and there were more than this, that had varying sized militias and different guns. And little Saint-Germain was shorter than me. He was like 4 feet 11, but when you put on his 4-inch heels and his 1-foot plume, he was over 6 feet tall. And he had a group of 80 very well-dressed soldiers. There were some others there. You had the U.S. Navy and a schooner and a schooner and a sloop, and some shallow draft gunboats on Lake Bourne. Some very questionable forts, too few guns, ammunition. I mean, he was low on everything. Jackson began sending out requests, and we've got many documents where he's saying, I've got to have troops, I've got to have them now. And a militia of 1,500 Tennesseans under the command of Jackson's good friends, William Carroll and John Coffey, in their Carroll and Coffey County, Tennessee, they came as well. They were well armed, and they were well provisioned, and they were paid up front by the U.S. quartermaster. Okay? They would go by boat. Jackson had requested by land, but they came by boat, and they left on December 1st, or they reached the Cumberland on December 1st, and arrived in New Orleans about 3 weeks later. While they were coming down here, they were very well organized. They built forges on the flatboats and rafts, and they were making shot and preparing for this big battle. Here are Carol and Coffee.
What's a frizzen?
What?
What's a frizzen?
Oh, a frizzen. Okay, a frizzen is the steel piece on the gun. For those of you that were here yesterday, the flint strikes the frizzen, and it hits. It makes a spark and sends the spark down into the gun barrel. And that's what that is. Okay, so here's basically two different brigades and with different regiments. Kentucky was doing the same thing. We have Governor Isaac Shelby, who called for 2,500 troops again. He got about 2,256, because by that time we'd already lost most of our casualties, and we'd been everywhere. Kentucky was pretty well exhausted. The group that was armed, the regiment that was armed, was Gabriel Slaughter's regiment. There were a few assorted guns along the way. The big problem was, how were they going to get there? They hadn't planned. The government said Shelby had heard from the quartermaster they were going to send some boats and things, but they didn't show up. And as men began to collect on the Ohio River, no boats showed up, and the expedition might have been over. But a Colonel Richard Taylor, who was the state quartermaster, he borrowed $6,000 of his own money and bought some very questionable flatboats. He was sold several lemons, I hate to say it. But anyway, it became even worse. By the time they got to the falls of the Ohio, the men were in bad shape. They stopped there, and it's Louisville today, and they began buying pots and pans and scavenging things up, and one pot, one pan for every 80 men. That was pretty bad. Many of the men had left with just the clothes on their backs because they'd been promised they would get guns. But to go into battle without a gun, or without pay, they didn't get pay. They said, well, we'll take care of that later. So you know how that goes. But anyway, the rotten flatboats began breaking up. By the time they got to the Cumberland River that Kentuckians had to put in, that was terrible. And the most glaring deficiency, and John Thomas sent word ahead, it was only 1 in 3 Kentuckians were armed. Okay, Jackson was in trouble in his own shape. We're talking, he was found out that late born he had lost his gunboats. He had 5 gunboats, and he said, I've lost my eyes on the lakes. I have got to have help. Hasten. The lakes are open to the enemy. He said, I am prepared to die in the last ditch before he shall reach our city. And he sent similar letters to Coffee and to the Kentucky and Mississippi Dragoons. We've heard about the Villeroy's Canal, the British got in, and Jackson was faced with this horrible imminent invasion. They had gotten within just 2 hours walk to New Orleans. There's the man that did not block the canal. And so the British were already massing. Again, when Jackson found this out, he said, by the eternal, they shall not sleep on our soil. We fight tonight. He could say that with a degree of confidence because the Tennesseans had arrived. The people of New Orleans turned out to see them and were just amazed at their appearance. They were dressed in animal skins. They smelled the high heavens. They were unshaven, dirty, unkempt. They didn't look like militia or army men, but they were armed to the teeth. Every Tennessee rifleman had a rifle. They had an extra gun, usually a pistol, a knife, a tomahawk, and they impressed. Jackson had a beautiful plan. He said, we're going to punch the British in the nose before they can come in. So he let the Carolinas slip down, and he said, you're going to open up with a big blast here. The big thing up here is the Tennesseans. They were able to come out in the cypress woods and come around. His Marines were going to come down the Levee Road. The Tennessee fighting was getting to be, we're going to talk, it goes down to hand-to-hand stuff. They came through a cypress swamp. The guns went off on the Carolina and just devastated the British near the levee. And then Jackson's Marines opened up, And finally, the Tennesseans, and I mean, we're talking saber and bayonet against knife and tomahawk. At the end, we have Jackson pulls back to the McCarty plantation, starts digging his ditch. The Tennesseans were there throughout that whole process. We have the ditch that was built. We will sing this in a minute. You'll have that ready. When you see the next sign, we'll sing that and we'll conclude. The reconnaissance in force, the Tennesseans are there when the British try to take over on the 28th and try to break that line where they are. The Tennesseans stand firm. The Kentuckians are still not there. As the British they're massing, they've got now, they do artillery bombardment on New Year's Day, and the Kentuckians are still not there. Neither are the weapons that Jackson was asking for. They were supposed to be put on a boat, and steamboat, with a second steamboat, and nobody knew where this was. The government had decided to put them on a flatboat because it was cheaper, and of course we're talking time was of essence. When Jackson found out that flatboat man was stopping and having a good time at Natchez and different places, well, I can't tell you what he called the man, nor what he threatened to do with him. We've got ladies present and a pastor back there. So, moving on, the British troops began massing on the plains of Chalmette. Where were the Kentuckians? Jackson gets the news. Only 1 in 3 are armed, and only 1 in 10 have a battlefield-capable gun. And he said, I don't believe it. Never in my life have I seen a Kentuckian without a gun, a bottle of whiskey, and a pack of cards. And not in that order, but he was furious. Again, not knowing that Henry Clay and the peace delegation had already signed the treaty. And so Jackson was just furious. When he saw the Kentuckians come in, I mean, they looked pitiful. They were clutching at the holes in their clothing. They were starving. They looked like skeletal men. John Adair had to take over for John Thomas, and he suggested that we take our armed Kentuckians and use them as a flying force behind wherever Jackson would be needed. He also rummaged up 400 rusty escopetas from the city armory. The British take off, and again on January the 8th, the rockets, red glare, straight up in the air, and it was unbelievable. And I won't go through the battle because we all know what happened. In 40 minutes, it was over with. And whether the pictures are right or wrong, Jackson was not standing on cotton bales. They did not wear trews. They did not wear the big hats that day, the 93rd Highlanders. But you will see a frontiersman, a Kentuckian or a Tennessean in every painting. And they did make the line, but again, the Kentuckians and the biggest casualties that were suffered, the highest casualties were on the Kentucky-Tennessee side, where they stood shoulder to shoulder. Pakenham was killed, as you know, and they don't know who killed him. They still are, we honored Ephraim Rank in Greenville, Kentucky, with a big statue, and they claimed he shot Pakenham. There were folks in Tennessee that claimed they shot Pakenham. Actually, I'm the only one that knows who did. It was the main character in my novel, Witter's Landing. But he was hit with shrapnel and a lot of other things there. But I will tell you that on the West Bank, there was a disastrous retreat. It started by the Louisiana militia, Arnaud. There were only a few of them. The Kentuckians, there were only 170 of them, unarmed. And the British general was going to try to roll up the West Bank and shoot across at Jackson's line. And the Kentuckians fled. They weren't well armed. It was only one per 3 yards. It was unbelievable. And so at the end, Jackson was like a coach, and he said, all right, we got to analyze this game. What went wrong over there? Well, both the Louisiana commanders held their noses and said it was those dirty, shirted Kentuckians. They fled. And so basically Jackson wrote, and he says, that they ingloriously fled. The Kentuckians, we expected so much of them, but they ingloriously fled. Adair and the other commanders said, take it back. And Jackson said, I will not. And he didn't. They actually ordered Commodore Patterson's report was worse. But they did have a commission, and they said, well, the Louisiana militia went first. The Kentuckians, they were poorly armed, and they didn't have enough. They were in a small ditch. They had no breastworks. They fled. So they basically, it was sort of like they said, it may be excusable. But I think, when you've got a gun, you fire all your shots and the British are still coming. You've got no time. You have to retreat. And basically that dissolved into a rout. But by the time the commanders took the position at the BoNOHS15 Canal, it was over. And that was the big thing. Hunters of Kentucky becomes one of Jackson's theme songs. It was actually a campaign election year. I wonder if I figured that. But anyway, the episode touched off a bitter debate that would not, here's this. Without the Kentuckians and the Tennesseans, we would have a quite different story here. Jackson was a Tennessean. Can you imagine any other man so mean, so tough, so resourceful, that and put that coalition of races and different peoples together to stand against the number one superpower of the world? And then you had those Tennesseans that performed stellarly throughout the entire time. And Jackson, in his letter in 1828, said the Kentuckians on the East Bank with the other men did well. And so it was a vindication. The rifle that you sing about in the song, you'll sing about that. It is the Kentucky rifle. It was not known that until the battle. And let's sing it. Are you ready? I'm going to get you some music as well.
All right, maybe one verse.
One verse.
How about one verse?
Good. Our Jackson, he was wide awake and not as scared of trifles. For well he knew what aim we'd take with our Kentucky rifles. So he had us down by Cypress Swamp. The ground was low and rocky, and there stood John Bull and Marshall Plumb. And here was old Kentucky, oh Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, oh Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky.